Namaskar friends, I hope you're in the pink of your health and religiously preparing for your upcoming exam. So, like all the other videos of this series, let us take 10 more questions and learn little more of the system of governance in India, which you all are aspiring to become a part of very soon. As always, it will be beneficial if you keep your copy of the Constitution of India close for reference as we move along. I also recommend that you please pause the video as the question is displayed, answer the question first yourself and only then proceed to listen. That's how we can improve. And like all the other videos, on the right hand side, you will see some pictures. In this video, some dresses from across the world with some iconic characteristics. Now, while you listen to the explanation, your task is to identify the country where the dress is worn, and if possible, the name of the dress. Lastly, there is some additional learning at the end of the video. Like always, mostly random but relevant for our studies and life. This time, I'll talk about the black swan theory. So, I strongly suggest to complete watching this video. Even if you wish to skip some part of my talk here, do watch it till the end by skipping, or even the better option of increasing the speed, but do complete it. So let us take the first question, and that is the Member of Parliament Local Area Development, the MP LADS scheme, is implemented by. The answer is MOSPI, Statistics and Program Implementation. We have actually a question in the next video about the details of this scheme. I'm sure you know the background. This was started in 1993. Originally, this was under the Ministry of Rural Development, but very soon, within a year or so, it came to MOSPI. Originally, the amount was rupees 5 lakh, and today it has increased to rupees 5 crore per annum for the members of Parliament of both the houses. Similarly, in the states also you have MLA LAD scheme. Anyway, we'll discuss more in the next video where we see how it works, etc. And that I believe you must have realized is the kilt from Scotland, the traditional dress of Gaelic men and boys in the Scottish Highlands. Anyway, next question is the present policy of the government to provide reservation of 3% to physically handicapped persons in public employment is an example of. Some options are given: horizontal reservation, vertical, parallel. There is nothing called parallel reservation really, and even common reservation. I just created these things just to fill the gap and not really to confuse you, but a lot of us have the habit of getting confused. Anyway, so the best way to understand, I find that people generally remain confused about the actual difference between horizontal and vertical reservation, and I find the best way to understand it is to just look at the result of UPSC, the exam for which you are preparing. I'll show you that if you see, this is this year's result, which is the 2019 exam. Just a few weeks back it came out, and if you see this, the second point, let me enlarge this, and it reads that so many candidates under different categories have been recommended for appointment. So see, this is exactly what it is. These are all vertical reservations, right? Whereas if you see the all these categories, they cut across all the vertical categories. They are the same, and this is the same thing we are talking about, the disability. So PWBD, that is the persons with benchmark disability, 1, 2, 3, and different categories that are there, which are locomotor, visual, hearing, and multiple disabilities. Benchmark means 40% disability. Anyway, so see this the physically handicapped, this cuts across all the vertical categories of reservation, and these are the 4 vertical categories: economically weaker, OBC, SC, and ST. Anyway, all these kind of things. So that's essentially the idea of horizontal and vertical reservation. So we move on to the next question, and that is the term MOOCs, or actually it's not a word in itself, so it's MOOC, has been in vogue recently. What do you understand by this term? I don't like to give a scolding all the time, but see, these options, especially things like microprocessor overlaid organic computation, this is garbage, this is nonsense, right? I just created because I thought I don't know what else to create as a full form for MOOC, and a lot of you still mark that, you can see on the channel. Anyway, the answer is massive open online courses. It was in the news also. UGC, the University Grants Commission, has doubled up the academic credit limit for online courses to 40%. Earlier it was 20%. This means a student can pick subjects relevant to their course online using I'm sure you know about this also, the Swayam platform, and gain credits for it. Right? So attending these courses online will be equivalent to attending physical lectures in the class as per the norms, and now up to 40% has been allowed. See, in the background of this COVID, these MOOCs have really gained across the world. Also, UGC has constituted an expert committee that will map existing courses and with the MOOCs. Which can be constituted for the course, right? It would also identify areas or subjects for which MOOCs are not available, and therefore create digital content for those courses too. So there is a big focus on this area. We should be up to speed with all these things. And that's the Maasai tribe of Kenya. It's just a fancy beadwork is what helps us recognize them. Okay, next question is, which of the following statements is or are correct about languages in India? And it says Hindi is the national language of India. No, there is no national language of India. In fact, the term national language has not been even recognized anywhere in the constitution or even the act. We have official language, right? And that is Hindi and English. Similarly, the states, they can adopt their own official languages. So there is an official languages act. It is recognized in the constitution. It is recognized in the law, but there is nothing called national language. Similarly, even the second statement is wrong because there is nothing called national language of India. So both of these statements are wrong. Then if you see the President's address at the joint session of both houses of Parliament every year is read by the President in either Hindi or English. Absolutely correct. The President decides. So when Pranab Mukherjee was the President earlier, I remember he used to speak in English while Mr. Ramnath Kovind prefers to speak in Hindi. And what happens, it's part of the tradition and protocol that after the President's speech is completed, it is the Vice President who reads the first and the last paragraph of the speech in the other language. So right now what you'll see will happen is Mr. Venkaiah Naidu, he will speak the same speech, the first and the last paragraph in English, and he'll say that the rest of the speech may be considered to have been read. So it's just parliamentary drama, if you want to say so. So yeah, third statement is definitely correct. And those hats, you must have realized, the conical hat, the non-la of Vietnam. A good number of you got it right. This question, yeah, of course. So it was not that difficult. So I'm happy. Okay, next question is, how is sedition defined under the laws in India? I'm sure you know sedition is in Article 124A of the Indian Penal Code. It is a non-bailable offence. Punishment under this law varies from 3 years of imprisonment up to life imprisonment and a fine. A person charged with sedition cannot apply for a government job, so you need to be careful of that. And the person has to live without a passport and must present themselves in the court as and when required. In recent times, there is a lot of demand to scrap this section, largely due to the indiscriminate use to suppress any voice against the government. As can be expected, it is the courts who have come to the rescue and interpreted more liberally in favor of the right to dissent. For example, the courts have very clearly said that mere criticism of the government cannot be seen as a sedition. There must be some kind of incitement, right? And in January this year, Shri Hemant Soren, the Chief Minister of Jharkhand, announced a recommendation to drop sedition charges from 3,000 people who had taken part in the protests against the Citizenship Amendment Act. And he said a very beautiful thing, and I quote for your pondering: "Laws are not made to frighten and silence the people, but to instill a feeling of safety in public. The government will work towards being the voice of the people." And it's a very interesting thing, because I feel that if you ever feel scared of saying something because it will be a backlash on you from the government, that's not a good government then. That's not, within limits, of course. That frightening and silencing is not the real meaning of democracy. In fact, even Gandhiji said about this section that it is the prince among the political sections of IPC to suppress the liberty of the citizen. Jawaharlal Nehru also was against this, and he said that it is an obnoxious and highly objectionable, and the sooner we get rid of it, the better it is. So a lot of people, this is all British. We have talked about this, Mr. Babington Macaulay, his creations. So a lot of things have happened there. Anyway, how it is defined? Well, it's a long definition. I'm sure you would have read by now. You can read yourself also, where it excites disaffection towards the government of India. That's one of the terms used there. Anyway, you can read the exact definition yourself. And that's the kimono from Japan. So next question is, which of the following statements are correct regarding the reservation in public employment in India? It can be made by the legislature by enacting a law. It can be made by executive by issuing an order. It can be done by both ways. Because if you read Article 16, it very clearly says by law, and by law in Article 13 has been defined as any of these kind of things. In fact, if you see the recent example of the economically weaker sections, how did it happen? So the first step was that the government brought the 113th Constitutional Amendment Act, and this made a enabling provision in Article 16, which said that the government can make a provision for EWS. And then followed from that, as a second step, the Department of Personnel and Training brought out an order. They brought out an order that we are going to give 10% reservation and the criteria will be XYZ, right? So that's how both can be used. So generally what happens, it's a mixture of both of them. So there is a law, and as per the law, the rule making power is delegated, but otherwise also it is possible. And that headgear, the typical the keffiyeh in Palestine. That, by the way, is Yasser Arafat. I hope you recognized him. This is also known as, I don't know how to pronounce these words really, but shemag in Jordan and the gutra in Saudi Arabia, where it is normally either white or red and white. You must have seen. But the black and white is a typical of Palestine, the Palestinian design of it. Okay, well, the performance needs to be better. This is, again, as I always say, basic concepts, basic principles. So we move on to the next question, and that is the right to freedom of movement as envisaged under Article 19 of the Constitution includes right to move inside the country, right to move out of the country. Now, moving out of the country is not the right there. If you remember, or if you have read, if you have not read, read now. Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause D. It very clearly gives the freedom of movement throughout the territory of India, not outside, throughout the territory of India. Right to move outside the country is actually coming from Article 21. It is protected there, the right to life and personal liberty. Okay, so it is just a right to move inside the country under Article 19. Don't get confused ever. And those dresses, the kira, the gho, and of course, Madam Swaraj in the sari, the traditional attire of the Bhutanese people, and that, by the way, is the king of Bhutan and the queen of Bhutan, Jigme Khesar Wangchuk. So we move on to the next question, and that is, which of the following is or are valid grounds under Article 19 of the Constitution of India to restrict the right to freedom of movement of citizens? Well, the previous question we saw what Article 19(1) subclause D provides. So the restrictions of this are in clause 5, and there are two restrictions. It says interest of the general public, which is simply we say public interest, and also the protection of the interest of any scheduled tribe. There is no public health, no public order. Now, see, don't get confused. In the lockdown that we are seeing in the country and also in the world, many countries, because of health factors, the lockdown and the people's movement has been restricted, right? But see, the ground is not really public health specified. It is public interest. Of course, public interest covers so many things. We should be very careful with what are the provisions that have been defined, because if you go to the court and say public health, it will not be accepted. You'll have to prove that it is actually public interest. It's not that difficult to prove, but the words written there are public interest, the general interest of the public. Okay, so oh well, see the performance. Okay, that's why I have said that Article 19, Article 21, some of these articles you should read very carefully. Alright, so let's move on to the next question, and that is, in the context of the President of the USA, what is a qualified veto? Now, in this also a lot of people got confused. They thought that it is the veto where the president directs the legislature to pass the bill again with a special majority. No, the president does not direct. See, that's why we need to understand things very, very carefully. The president only returns. It is very similar to how Indian president has a suspensive veto. Right? The president doesn't care that do you want to pass it on or not. The president just returns. Now, what happens with Indian president, that by a simple majority again, the same majority which was used first time, the second time again it can be passed and it becomes an act. The president does not have any more veto. But in the case of US president, within the time frame of 10 days that is given to the US president, the president can return the bill, right? So he's in a way again suspending the bill, but the US Congress cannot pass the bill now by simple majority. They need to pass with a special majority, the 2/3, the provision. So if they don't pass, that's okay, it will not become an act. But if they pass, then it will become an act. So essentially, the same kind of power in India and USA is called suspensive veto in India and qualified veto in USA. So it is nothing but option D, a veto where the president returns the bill with their objections, right? He doesn't care whether the bill is passed or not. It's none of his business really. It is the legislature to decide all of that. So don't get confused. All these terms, the definitions should be very clear. We cannot afford to have less than 1/4 performance on such kind of questions. And I feel very good that I can confuse you by just creating some random options here. See, these are questions that I make. They are not copied from anywhere. So as long as we're getting that clarity, we are learning. That's all the goal is. Let's improve ourselves. We still have 40 days. Let's improve every day. So the last question of today's video: if the law made by a state legislature on a subject in the concurrent list is inconsistent with the union law, then such a law of the state legislature will be, 4 options are given. Now see, ultra vires means it is beyond authority. Ultra vires, it is beyond your authority. That means you are not incompetent to make the law. Now here, is there incompetency? No, it is just they can make a law, they both can make a law, but if there is inconsistency, right? So the issue is of inconsistency. Similarly, option C, if you see, why will it be unconstitutional? To make a law on concurrent list, is it unconstitutional? Maybe the law was made already before even the union made the law. So there can be nothing unconstitutional. Use logic. Similarly, void ab initio. Why would be void ab initio? Void ab initio means it was dead from birth, stillborn, right? The child was born dead. So the law was born dead. That's what they're talking about. No, that's why would that happen? As I said, it is totally possible that the state made a law beforehand. And now when the union makes a law, there is inconsistency, right? So effectively, there is no other option, and logically also, if you understand the meaning, that is what is called repugnancy, where there is inconsistency. So if let's say state legislature makes a law and the center also makes a law and there is some area where there is some conflict, then the central law will prevail. But imagine a situation, see that after 5 years, 10 years, X years, center repeals the law, then this shadowed area of the state law again becomes valid, right? So there is nothing unconstitutional about it. It is just shadowed by the central law. Understand these things very carefully. The answer should be repugnancy. And performance. And that's the Fustanara, the Greek. These are the Greek guards, by the way. That's how their attire looks like. And as part of the learning that I always try to bring some random things, the black swan theory. It is a rare and unexpected event. But the point is that later on, retrospectively in hindsight, it looks very obvious when you see that it was going to happen. Like, let's say, the global meltdown of 2008, where the big Lehman Brothers, etc., they collapsed. It was a black swan event, but actually when people analyzed, looked at it, they saw that it had to happen. So the point is, when things are going wrong, people are not able to realize it. Make sure it's not happening in your life. There's a very good book by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, The Impact of the Highly Improbable. Anyway, read more about it and make sure in your life you are not reading misleading patterns, you're reading the right patterns. So with that note, I'll end this video here. I'll see you very soon. As I told you, we are closing in on the 50 videos. That was the promise of this series. So hopefully we'll be wrapping up soon. Thank you very much. See you next time. Bye-bye.